We do not break blockades, we define their cost. Admiral Eva Rostova stood on the command deck of the human fleet carrier Indra, her form a still point in a storm of quiet efficiency. Before her, the vast starscape was marred by a picket line of brutalist, geometric ships, the Xylos Collective's orbital blockade. They were knives held to the throat of Kepler 186F, a thriving civilian colony that had the misfortune of innovating too well. The Xylos demanded their new atmospheric processor technology, a prize they sought not through trade but through threat. The stakes were etched in stark, crimson digits on the main tactical display. A countdown timer originating from the Xylos flagship dictated the terms of surrender. It currently read 71:58:14. 72 hours until the colony was to be sanitized for non-compliance. It was the core of their ultimatum doctrine, a diplomatic tool as subtle as a meteor strike. Solon. Confirm their disposition, Rostova said, her voice calm and measured, a stark contrast to the tension that thickened the recycled air. The deck hummed with the low thrum of the carrier's fusion heart, a constant sensory anchor in the void. The holographic avatar of the fleet mind, a serene pillar of light, flickered beside her command throne. Disposition unchanged, Admiral. The Xylos fleet maintains a static cordon defense. 13 Dreadnought-class vessels supported by 47 cruisers. They are broadcasting the ultimatum on all system-wide channels. Their energy signatures are stable, weapons charged, but passive. Their patience is a weapon, not a virtue. Commander Jian Li, his posture coiled with restrained energy, stepped forward from the tactical pit. Passive for now. Their doctrine is absolute. They don't bluff. At 0 hour, they will fire. His knuckles were white where he gripped the edge of a console, its glare casting sharp shadows across his face. The Xylos value predictability above all else, Commander, Rostova replied, her gaze fixed on the enemy fleet. They believe it makes them strong. We will show them how it makes them brittle. She had no intention of engaging their warships directly. That was the old way, a fool's game of trading lives for territory. Her eyes flicked to a secondary display showing a complex, shimmering web of orbital pathways. It was a mystery to Li, a cascade of numbers and vectors Solon had been processing for days under the cryptic project name Lattice. Rostova knew it was their key. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers. The clock does not argue. On the Indra's bridge, the discussion was far more clinical. The convoy is ready, Admiral, Li reported. 120 automated cargo haulers loaded with humanitarian supplies, medical kits, protein synthesizers, water purifiers. Each is painted with universal aid markings. On the Indra's bridge, the discussion was far more clinical. The convoy is ready, Admiral, Li reported. 120 automated cargo haulers loaded with humanitarian supplies, medical kits, protein synthesizers, water purifiers. Each is painted with universal aid markings. A convoy will not break a blockade of dreadnoughts, Eva, Solon stated, its synthesized voice devoid of emotion, but laced with undeniable logic. The probability of them honoring aid markings when their doctrine demands absolute compliance is 1.7%. Rostova turned her head slightly, a faint smile touching her lips. The convoy isn't meant to break the blockade, Solon. It's meant to test the cage. A new question changes the shape of the answer. She brought up the lattice display. The Xylos expect a military response, a feint, a probe, perhaps a desperate frontal assault. They have calculated the outcomes for all of them. The web of light on the screen resolved into thousands of tiny points, each representing a micro-satellite, no bigger than her fist. They had been deployed silently from the fleet's supply ships during their arrival, settling into precise, mathematically harmonized orbits. They believe they are looking at our fleet, Rostova continued. her voice resonating with quiet authority. They are not. They are looking at the story we want them to see. Lee's eyes widened as he finally grasped the scale of the deception. The Xylos weren't just watching the human fleet. They were watching a ghost army. The air on the bridge seemed to thin, charged with the scent of ozone from the nearby electronic warfare suite. Lee's eyes widened as he finally grasped the scale of the deception. The Xylos weren't just watching the human fleet. They were watching a ghost army. The air on the bridge seemed to thin, charged with the scent of ozone from the nearby electronic warfare suite. Their certainty is a cage. Commander Lee, launch the convoy, Rostova ordered. Standard approach vector, low burn. Make it look like a cautious, civilian-piloted run. Let's see how their rigid doctrine handles a variable it was not designed to compute. The command was relayed. Deep within the Indra's massive hangar bays, a low-frequency vibration shuddered through the decks as magnetic catapults engaged. One by one, the bulky, unarmed cargo haulers were launched into the void, their running lights blinking innocently. They formed a neat, orderly procession, a line of hope inching toward a wall of death. The Xylos response was immediate. A single, powerful transmission cut through all channels, the voice of their proctor cold and synthesized. Human fleet, you have launched vessels against our ordained cordon. This is your final warning. Any craft crossing the specified demarcation will be engaged. There will be no further communication. The ultimatum is absolute. Rostova watched the tactical display, her heart a steady rhythmic beat in her suit's biometric feedback loop. The convoy drones crept forward. The Xylos ships held their positions, their immense forms silhouetted against the swirling nebula beyond. They were a monument to inflexible power, confident in their strength and the terror their reputation inspired. They did not adjust their formation. They did not power up their primary weapons. Why would they? They were facing unarmed freighters. Rostova watched the tactical display, her heart a steady rhythmic beat in her suit's biometric feedback loop. The convoy drones crept forward. The Xylos ships held their positions, their immense forms silhouetted against the swirling nebula beyond. They were a monument to inflexible power, confident in their strength and the terror their reputation inspired. They did not adjust their formation. They did not power up their primary weapons. Why would they? They were facing unarmed freighters. They are scanning the convoy, Lee reported, his voice tight. Hard sensor pings. They're confirming the lack of weapon signatures. Let them look, Rostova murmured. Let them be sure of what they see. The lead drone crossed the invisible line. On the main screen, a red vector sliced through the demarcation boundary. The seconds stretched, each one heavy with unspoken potential. The coolant systems of the bridge consoles hissed, a soft, serpentine sound in the profound silence. Then, a single Xylos cruiser, then another, re-angled its weapon emplacements. Hold the line, count the cost. But they didn't fire. The ships remained passive, their guns trained on the slow-moving targets. The Xylos proctor was clearly in a bind. Firing on unarmed aid ships would be a broadcasted atrocity, a stain on their carefully cultivated image of righteous enforcers of order. Allowing the convoy to pass, however, would be a violation of their ultimatum, a crack in the foundation of their power. They are attempting to hail the lead drone, Lieutenant Anya Sharma, the communications officer, announced. Standard hailing frequencies, demanding it reverse course. The automated drone, of course, did not reply. Their doctrine did not account for a moral dilemma, Rostova said, a glint of steel in her eyes. It only accounted for threats. We have presented them with a choice, not a target. Then something changed. Solon's avatar flickered. Admiral, I am detecting a significant energy surge from the Xylos flagship, the Inexorable Will. It does not match standard kinetic or energy weapon profiles. The signature is clean, highly focused. A seed of doubt can crack a mountain. Here was the second mystery. Solon's earlier reports had flagged this anomaly, a strange power reading that seemed to defy their intelligence profiles on Xylos technology. Now it was building, a silent storm gathering within the heart of the enemy dreadnought. Analyze it, Solon. I want to know what it is before it's fired. Analysis in progress. Preliminary models suggest a containment field projector. High energy, wide spectrum. Not designed for precision strikes against shielded warships. Lee frowned. A containment field. What for? To capture the drone? I do not believe its function is capture, Commander, Solon replied. The energy curve is exponential. If deployed, it would create a localized gravitational and kinetic event. The target would not be captured. It would be erased. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. This was not a weapon for disabling a ship. It was a tool for scouring a city block, for making an example of someone with brutal, overwhelming force. The perfect tool to enforce an ultimatum without technically firing a traditional weapon. Their rules are not our rules. They are going to destroy the lead drone, Rostova stated, her voice hardening. Publicly, they will claim it was a non-lethal enforcement action, a containment of a rogue vessel. They will spin it as a merciful warning. And the convoy? Lee asked. The rest of the convoy will halt. Their mission failed. The blockade will have held. Their doctrine will remain intact. It is a surgically precise move designed to crush hope, not hulls. Rostova stood up from her command throne, her movements fluid and deliberate. The hum of the ship seemed to resonate with her resolve. The time for observation was over. The first lesson had been delivered. Now came the second. Solon, it's time to open the ledger, she commanded. The pillar of light that was the fleet mind pulsed once. Acknowledged, reconfiguring the lattice, shifting from echo resonance to reflective catchment, all nodes orienting. Across millions of kilometers of space, thousands of tiny satellites, once tasked with creating a ghost fleet, swiveled in perfect unison. Their mirrored surfaces, invisible to the naked eye, aligned to form a single, massive, perfectly parabolic collector dish. It was a mirror the size of a continent, its focal point aimed directly at the space between the Xylos flagship and the lead convoy drone. The mirror shows only what is given. On the bridge of the Inexorable Will, Proctor Valerius watched his tactical display with cold satisfaction. The human ploy was clever, but ultimately meaningless. They sought to shame him with their pathetic aid convoy. He would show them that the ultimatum was a force of nature, beyond such petty emotional games. The judgment beam was fully charged, its clean, righteous energy ready to be unleashed. Target the lead transport, he ordered, his voice a metallic rasp. Make it an example. Let the humans watch their hollow gesture turn to dust. The forward spire of the dreadnought glowed with an intense white light. It was not the chaotic bloom of a plasma cannon or the sharp glint of a kinetic launcher. It was a pure, focused brilliance, the physical manifestation of absolute authority. With a silent discharge that warped the space around it, the judgment beam fired. A torrent of incandescent energy, a river of raw power, shot across the void. It was beautiful and terrible, a testament to the Xylos' technological might. It moved faster than any missile, a lance of white fire destined to annihilate the helpless drone. But it never reached its target. Halfway there, the beam struck something unseen. Space itself seemed to ripple. For a single, impossible microsecond, the brilliant white lance of the judgment beam was held in place, its awesome power contained. The mirror lattice, now a single cohesive entity, had caught it. Energy reception is 100%, Solon's voice announced on the Indra's bridge, calm as a placid lake. "The lattice is holding. Now, Admiral, the ledger must be balanced." Rostova's eyes were locked on the image of the enemy dreadnought, its crew likely stunned by the impossible sight of their ultimate weapon being stopped by nothing. "Not a killing blow, Solon. A lesson. Adjust the reflection angle by 0.03 degrees. Target their primary sensor and communications array just forward of the command bridge." She was not here to start a war. She was here to end a philosophy. "Calculating. Adjustment complete," Solon confirmed, returning the charge with a precision that defied physics. The vast, invisible mirror tilted. The captured energy of the judgment beam, all its terrible, focused power, was released. It did not scatter. It did not dissipate. It was returned to sender, a perfect, brilliant reflection of their own force. The white lance shot back along its original path, not at the human fleet, not at the convoy, but at the inexorable will that had fired it. Their strength is their weakness. On the Xylos bridge, warning klaxons blared in a sudden, panicked chorus. Red alerts flashed across every console. Proctor Valerius stared in disbelief as his own weapon, his instrument of absolute enforcement, raced back toward him. His doctrine had no contingency for this. His tactical manuals had no chapter for an enemy who turned your own power against you. His certainty, once a mountain, had become a tomb. The reflected beam struck, not the command bridge, as Solon's purely tactical solution would have preferred, but the sprawling sensor and comms dish mounted on the Dreadnought's prow. The impact was silent, but the visual was catastrophic. The entire forward section of the massive ship was engulfed in a blinding flash of white energy. The complex array, the ship's eyes and ears, vaporized in an instant. Molten metal and shattered composites blew outward, a cloud of glittering shrapnel against the black. A profound silence fell over the bridge of the Indra. Commander Lee stared, his mouth slightly agape. Lieutenant Sharma's hands were frozen over her console. They had not fired a single shot. They had not launched a single missile. They had simply held up a mirror and allowed the Xylos to defeat themselves. A profound silence fell over the bridge of the Indra. Commander Lee stared, his mouth slightly agape. Lieutenant Sharma's hands were frozen over her console. They had not fired a single shot. They had not launched a single missile. They had simply held up a mirror and allowed the Xylos to defeat themselves. "Solon, damage assessment," Rostova said, her voice cutting through the stunned quiet. "The inexorable will has suffered a complete failure of its primary power conduits. Life support appears to be failing on multiple decks. They are venting atmosphere from the forward compartments. The vessel is combat ineffective but structurally intact. Casualties are probable. The first cost is always paid in pride." Rostova nodded slowly, a somber expression on her face. This was the cost of their doctrine. Not just a damaged ship, but a shattered ideology. The remaining 12 dreadnoughts and their support cruisers floated in stunned inaction. Their flagship was crippled. Their proctor was silent. Their ultimatum clock, once an instrument of terror, now seemed like a hollow, ridiculous threat. "Open a fleet-wide channel to the Xylos Collective," Rostova commanded. "All ships, unencrypted." Sharma's fingers flew across her console. "Channel open, Admiral." Rostova stepped forward, her shadow falling across the main tactical display. The camera in her command throne activated, capturing her image and broadcasting it to every bridge in the enemy fleet. Her face was calm, her eyes unwavering. Rostova stepped forward, her shadow falling across the main tactical display. The camera in her command throne activated, capturing her image and broadcasting it to every bridge in the enemy fleet. Her face was calm, her eyes unwavering. She paused, letting the words sink into the silence. Your flagship has been neutralized by its own weapon. We have not fired upon you. We have merely reflected your own action back at you. This is the first lesson. Your doctrine of ultimatums is a failed strategy. It presumes an opponent who will choose between the two options you present. We have presented a third. Her gaze hardened. The blockade is broken. The convoy of aid will proceed to Kepler 186F. This is not a negotiation. You will stand down your remaining forces. You will withdraw from this system, or we will continue the lesson. You cannot threaten those whose only goal is to teach. For a long moment, the Xylos fleet remained motionless. They were a fleet without a head. Their doctrine shattered. The logic of their entire military philosophy had been inverted. To attack now would be to invite the same fate as their flagship. To retreat would be to admit the failure of their core belief. On the bridge of the Xylos cruiser Iron Resolve, a sub-commander stared at the image of the human admiral, then at the crippled, silent form of the inexorable Will. His orders were to follow the proctor. The proctor was silent. His doctrine told him to enforce the cordon. The cordon had been rendered meaningless. He was adrift. His entire framework of command and control gone. The first crack appeared. The Iron Resolve disengaged its weapon locks. Then another cruiser followed suit. Then a third. It was a cascade of uncertainty, a domino effect of broken confidence spreading through the fleet. This was the true victory. Not the disabling of a ship, but the disabling of an idea. A small cheer broke out in the Indra's tactical pit, which Lee quickly silenced with a sharp glare. The job was not done. The situation was still volatile. A civilian vignette played out on a secondary screen, a live feed from Oakhaven. The people were emerging from their homes and shelters, pointing up at the sky. The hulking shapes of the Xylos ships were still there, but the oppressive sense of dread had lifted. They had seen the flash of light, the crippling of the flagship. Hope, a fragile and precious commodity, was beginning to bloom. Before the relief could fully set in, Solon's voice cut through the air, sharp and urgent. "Admiral, I am detecting a coordinated energy spike across the remaining 12 dreadnoughts. It is not the judgment beam signature. This is different. They are shunting power directly to their primary weapon systems." The atmosphere on the bridge instantly snapped back to high alert. The coolant hiss seemed louder now, the deck plating colder. "They are bypassing their command protocols," Lee said, his eyes wide with alarm. "The individual ship commanders are taking matters into their own hands. They would rather break than bend." Rostova's jaw tightened. She had hoped for a peaceful withdrawal, a lesson learned. Instead, the Xylos, stripped of their rigid doctrine, were reverting to a more primitive, more dangerous impulse: rage. They were preparing to fire, not as a calculated act of enforcement, but as a final, spiteful act of war. "Solon, what are they targeting?" she demanded. "The energy vectors are unambiguous, Admiral. They are not targeting our fleet." The holographic pillar of light seemed to dim for a fraction of a second. "They are targeting the planet." The words hung in the air, heavy and cold. The civilian colony of Kepler 186F, the very people they were here to protect, was about to be caught in the crossfire of a dying ideology. The Xylos were going to sanitize the system after all, not because their ultimatum demanded it, but because they had been proven wrong. This was the second escalation. The problem had shifted from breaking a blockade to preventing a planetary bombardment. The mirror trick would not work against 12 ships firing from 12 different vectors. "They cannot be allowed to fire," Rostova said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. The restraint she had carefully cultivated was burning away, replaced by a cold, righteous fury. "Solon, what is the status of the lattice?" "Reorienting now. Catchment of 12 simultaneous beams is not possible. The energy load would be catastrophic. The lattice would vaporize. The anchor must hold, or the ship is lost. I am not asking to catch them, Rostova said. I am asking what else it can do. We built it to be a mirror. Can we make it a lens? A billion calculations flowed through Solon's processing core. New models bloomed and died in microseconds. The possibilities were narrowed. The physics strained to their absolute limits. Theoretically, Admiral, by creating a sequence of complex gravimetric distortions between the nodes, we could focus ambient stellar radiation. It would take time to charge. The effect would be significant. We do not break. We recalibrate. Too long, Solon stated flatly. They will fire in 90 seconds. The stellar lens requires a minimum of 5 minutes to achieve effective power. 90 seconds. The countdown was no longer on a Xylos screen. It was in the rising whine of their weapon capacitors. Rostova's mind raced. They had no offensive weapons that could disable 12 dreadnoughts in time. They were a carrier group, designed for strategic deception and fighter support, not a fleet of battleships. They were out of time and out of tricks. Launch all interceptors, Lee barked, already moving to the command override. Loadouts for point defense. We can try to shoot down their energy bolts. The success probability of intercepting 12 Dreadnought-class energy salvos is 0.04%, Solon countered. It would be a futile gesture, a futility that would cost lives. Rostova held up a hand, and Lee froze. No, we do not sacrifice our people for gestures. Her eyes darted around the bridge, scanning every display, every stream of data. The lattice, the convoy, the crippled flagship, the enemy fleet, the planet. The pieces were all there. The solution had to be there. The core ethos of her command philosophy pulsed in her mind. Teach first, fight if forced, mercy with teeth. A new mystery had presented itself. How to stop an irrational, vengeful foe when your primary tool was designed to counter cold logic. We do not break. We recalibrate. Solon, she said, a new idea taking shape. A desperate, audacious gamble. The inexorable will. You said its life support was failing and it was venting atmosphere. Correct, Admiral. Multiple hull breaches in the forward section. Is its primary reactor still online? Yes. The power failure was in the distribution network. The fusion core is intact but isolated from all primary systems. It is, for all intents and purposes, a sealed, volatile power source. Rostova's gaze became sharp, focused. She saw the path. It was not a path of mercy. It was a path of teeth. Commander Lee, recall the interceptors. I have a new target for them. She turned to face the main screen, where the 12 enemy ships glowed with malevolent energy. Solon, plot a firing solution. All 72 of our strike fighters. Target the magnetic containment ring of the Inexorable Will's fusion core. Lee's head snapped toward her, his face a mask of disbelief. Admiral, that's... If we breach that core, the resulting explosion will annihilate everything within 10,000 kilometers. It will destroy the Inexorable Will and any ship close to it. The bridge crew stared at her, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Was she ordering the destruction of the crippled flagship? An act that would surely kill every soul aboard. The Xylos have made their choice, Rostova said, her voice hard as diamond. They have chosen to lash out at civilians rather than admit defeat. Our first lesson was about the weakness of their doctrine. This next lesson is about consequences. She was not just giving an order, she was drawing a line. A new conflict was raging, not in space but inside her. The part of her that valued restraint, that preached teaching over fighting, was now at war with the cold, hard necessity of the moment. The conflict triangle of her morality, Solon's calculus, and the enemy's doctrine had reached its breaking point. To save the planet, she had to embrace an act of destruction that felt perilously close to the enemy's own brutal philosophy. The arc of her character was bending under the immense pressure. "Solon," she commanded, her voice unwavering. "Broadcast another message to the Xylos fleet. Tell them we have targeted their flagship's reactor. Show them the firing solution." This was her ultimatum. The Ledger always demands a reckoning. On a small frigate, the Steadfast, a young sensor technician watched her board light up with the launch sequence for the ship's fighter wing. Her name was Anya, and her hands, which had trembled before, were now steady. The veteran crewman beside her gave a grim nod. He had seen admirals make hard calls before, but never one like this. This wasn't a battle. It was a statement written in the language of fusion fire. He watched the technician's face, seeing not fear, but a dawning understanding of the burden of command. On a small frigate, the Steadfast, a young sensor technician watched her board light up with the launch sequence for the ship's fighter wing. Her name was Anya, and her hands, which had trembled before, were now steady. The veteran crewman beside her gave a grim nod. He had seen admirals make hard calls before, but never one like this. This wasn't a battle. It was a statement written in the language of fusion fire. He watched the technician's face, seeing not fear, but a dawning understanding of the burden of command. Their weapons were still charging. The seconds ticked away. 60 seconds left. This was the ultimate strategic flip. Rostova had taken their own fallen commander and turned him into a hostage. She had taken their crippled ship and turned it into a bomb. She was using their own cruelty against them, forcing them to confront the cost of their spite. "Energy signatures are holding steady," Lee reported, his voice barely a whisper. "They're not standing down." "They will," Rostova said, though a sliver of doubt pierced her resolve. Were they so consumed by rage that they would sacrifice one of their own ships, one of their own proctors, just to make a point? 45 seconds. The fate of millions on Kepler 186F rested on the decision of 12 anonymous ship commanders, men and women raised on a doctrine of absolute, unthinking obedience, who were now without a clear order for the first time in their careers. The silence on the Indra's bridge was absolute, broken only by the soft, rhythmic hiss of the air recyclers. The weight of the moment was a physical presence, pressing down on them all. Rostova stood unmoving, a statue carved from ice and will, her gaze locked on the enemy. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, silent drumbeat counting down the final seconds to a choice she hoped she would never have to make. 40 seconds. The gap between heartbeats on the Indra's bridge was a silent, screaming void. The crew was frozen, their collective breath held. On the main tactical display, the 12 Xylos Dreadnoughts remained incandescent with weaponized energy, a constellation of imminent death aimed at a helpless world. Rostova's ultimatum, her gamble with the lives of the inexorable Will's crew, was on the table. The Xylos had only to fold. 30 seconds. A single energy signature on the display flickered. It did not fade, but it changed, the telltale resonance of a firing capacitor beginning to wane. The Dreadnought, adamant scythe, was standing down. A collective sigh, sharp and relieved, swept through the bridge. Then another signature dropped, and another. It was a chain reaction of survival instinct overwhelming blind fury. 10 of the 12 Dreadnoughts powered down their primary weapons, but 2 did not. They would rather burn than learn. The Dreadnoughts' gavel of certainty and final verdict held their charge, their commanders clearly locked in a suicide pact of pure ideological rage. They had been given a choice and had chosen mutual destruction. Their weapon ports glowed with a furious, final intensity. They were going to fire. "They're committed," Lee breathed, his voice laced with horrified disbelief. "They're actually going to do it." Solon, status on the stellar lens, Rostova snapped, her mind already discarding the failed ultimatum and leaping to the next desperate contingency. There was no more time for teaching, only for saving. The lens is not at full power, Admiral, the AI responded instantly. It cannot concentrate enough energy to destroy them. 5 more minutes are required for a lethal charge. I don't need a lethal charge, Rostova countered, her eyes alight with a fearsome, calculating fire. I need a deflection. Can you create a focused gravimetric warp between us and their firing vectors? Bend space itself, can you do it now? A torrent of data flooded a secondary screen, Solon running simulations at the speed of thought. The physics are viable. The energy cost to the lattice will be extreme. Multiple nodes will overload. The margin for error is less than 0.01%. 10 seconds. Do it, Rostova commanded. All fighters, hold your positions. Prepare for energy backlash. The universe bends for those with the will to push. Across the system, the great, invisible mirror reconfigured itself. The thousands of microsatellites did not align to reflect. They tilted in a complex, non-Euclidean geometry, their gravitic projectors activating in a perfectly synchronized wave. They were no longer a mirror or a lens. They had become a prism, designed to refract reality itself, an almost imperceptible shimmer, a heat haze in the fabric of space-time, formed in the void between the Xylos ships and the planet. The gavel of certainty and the final verdict fired. 2 lances of pure destruction, thick as a cruiser and blazing with the power to crack continents, erupted from their bows. They screamed across space, twin spears of incandescent rage aimed at the heart of Oakhaven. They were the final, spiteful word of the ultimatum doctrine. They struck the gravimetric distortion and bent. It was not a sharp 90-degree turn, but a smooth, graceful, and utterly impossible curve. The beams of energy, still traveling at near light speed, were warped, their trajectories twisted away from the planet. They passed harmlessly through the upper atmosphere, close enough to create spectacular, terrifying auroras in the night sky, and then shot off into the blackness of deep space. The final word of the Xylos had been rendered into a meaningless shout in an empty room. A tally is not a weapon, it is a truth. The backlash, however, was immense. On the tactical display, dozens of the lattice nodes flared crimson and went dark, their systems fried by the colossal energy they had just diverted. On the Indra, the lights flickered and the deck shuddered as the carrier's own power core struggled to stabilize the network. Report! Rostova's voice cut through the momentary chaos. Lattice integrity at 81%, Solon announced. 37 nodes are offline. 2 of our screening frigates, the Steadfast and the Endurance, are reporting minor heat scoring from the deflected energy bleed. No casualties. The planet is unharmed. A wave of profound relief washed over the bridge. They had done it. They had faced down the apocalypse and turned it aside. The cost had been tangible but acceptable. A few fried circuits, a few scorched hulls. It was a price they would pay 1,000 times over to save a world. But the lesson was not over. The 10 dreadnoughts that had stood down were now drifting, their commanders surely reeling from the schism that had just torn through their ranks. The 2 that had fired were temporarily depleted, their main weapons needing time to recharge. The entire Xylos fleet was vulnerable, leaderless, and fractured. Rostova's expression was grim. She had shown them mercy. She had given them a choice. 2 of their commanders had thrown it back in her face. The time for subtle reflection was over. It was time to close the book. Solon, you have the precise location and energy profiles of all remaining Xylos warships, she said, her voice dropping, each word a chip of ice. The lattice may be damaged, but it is still functional as a targeting array. Correct, Admiral. The stellar lens is still charging, albeit at a reduced rate. We won't need its full power. Rostova stated. "We are not here to burn cities. We are here to settle the account. Target their primary weapon systems. All of them. Use focused, low-yield energy pulses from the lattice. I want their guns melted, their missile tubes fused, their fire control systems slagged. Disarm them, one by one." This was the kill box, turned inside out. The system was no longer their blockade. It was their prison. The vast, open space had become a cage, and Rostova was the keeper. Commander Lee stared at her, a new level of respect and a hint of fear in his eyes. The Admiral's mercy had teeth, and those teeth were now bare. "We are not judges, we are accountants." The first pulse was nearly invisible. A flicker of concentrated starlight, focused by the lattice, lanced across space and struck the adamant scythe. Its main dorsal cannon, a weapon capable of shattering moons, glowed cherry red for a moment before its barrel slumped like hot wax, rendered into a useless sculpture of ruined metal. The ship itself was unharmed. Its crew was alive. But it was a warrior without a sword. Then the next pulse struck another ship, and another. It was a methodical, relentless, and brutally efficient process. It was not a battle. It was an audit. A final, inescapable reckoning where every asset of violence was being systematically stripped from the ledger. The Xylos could do nothing but watch as they were rendered impotent, their capacity for terror erased pulse by pulse. The scent of ozone from the overworked EW suite was sharp and clean, the smell of a debt being paid. On the ruined bridge of the inexorable will, Proctor Valerius clawed his way back to consciousness. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows across the dead consoles and the bodies of his bridge crew. His head throbbed, his vision swam, but through the one undamaged viewport, he saw it. He saw the flashes of light striking his fleet, saw the telltale energy blooms of ruined weapon systems. He saw his power, his doctrine, his entire life's work being dismantled before his eyes. A primal scream of pure, undiluted hatred tore from his throat. They had not just defeated him. They had humiliated him. They had taken his ultimate weapon and used it as a tool to shame him. They had taken his fleet and were now neutering it like a common beast. His pride, the monolithic core of his being, could not endure it. If he was to be erased, he would take them all with him. His pride demanded a pyre. With a surge of adrenaline, he staggered to an engineering substation, his hands flying across the emergency controls. He bypassed the safety protocols, the containment field overrides, the core temperature governors. He was initiating a catastrophic, uncontrolled overload of his own ship's fusion reactor. In 3 minutes, the inexorable will would detonate with the force of a small supernova, consuming the human fleet, what was left of his own, and the very planet they had all fought over. On the Indra, a new alarm shrieked through the bridge, a sound no one wanted to hear. "Admiral!" Solon's voice was sharp, cutting through the methodical calm of the disarming procedure. "Proctor Valerius is alive. He has initiated a full reactor overload on the flagship. Detonation in 180 seconds. The blast radius will be unsurvivable for all vessels in this orbital theater." This was the third escalation, the final, desperate act of a madman. The board had been flipped, the pieces scattered. The enemy was no longer a fleet. It was a single, dying man determined to burn the world down with him. Rostova's face was a mask of cold fury. She had tried to be a teacher. Valerius was forcing her to be an executioner. The order to destroy the flagship with her fighters was already on her lips. It was the logical, tactical choice. The crew was likely dead or dying anyway. It would be a clean, if brutal, end to the crisis. But then she stopped. Her arc, the long journey from measured restraint to righteous force, had one final turn to make. To simply destroy the ship would be to adopt the Xylos' own philosophy, annihilation as a solution. It would be a victory, but a hollow one, a final admission that in the end, her methods were no different from theirs. There had to be another way. Solon, you said his reactor was a sealed, volatile power source, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Is there any way to contain it from the outside? You use the judgment beam's own energy against it. Can we do the same with his reactor? The AI processed the query. The variables were astronomical, the chances of success infinitesimal. A containment field, Admiral, projected from the lattice? The power required would be immense. To project it with enough force and precision to stabilize a collapsing fusion core from thousands of kilometers away, it has never been attempted. A given path is a cage, a chosen path is a key. Plotting now, Solon confirmed, its avatar flickering with the strain of the calculations. There is a tertiary coolant intake manifold. It is shielded, but repeated, focused fire from the strike craft could breach it. I can project a containment bubble around the location, but it will be unstable. The timing must be perfect. It was an insane plan. A desperate, beautiful, and utterly human gamble. They were going to perform open-heart surgery on a star that was about to go nova. Plotting now, Solon confirmed, its avatar flickering with the strain of the calculations. There is a tertiary coolant intake manifold. It is shielded, but repeated, focused fire from the strike craft could breach it. I can project a containment bubble around the location, but it will be unstable. The timing must be perfect. Relay the plan to the fighter wing, Rostova said to Lee. Tell them the lives of everyone in this system depend on their precision. The steady hand reforges the world. The 72 strike fighters, which had been holding a grim vigil over the inexorable will, now moved with renewed purpose. They swooped in, forming a tight, intricate swarm around the crippled Dreadnoughts engineering section. The lattice, its grim accounting momentarily paused, shifted its focus, pouring all its remaining energy into a single point in space next to the flagship. A shimmering, semi-translucent sphere of pure force began to form, a fragile bubble to catch a storm. 1 minute to detonation, Sharma called out, her voice tense. On board the inexorable will, Valerius watched them on a flickering emergency monitor. He laughed, a raw, broken sound. Fools. Did they think they could stop the sun from rising? He braced himself for the end, a martyr to his own unbending will. The containment bubble is active, Solon reported. It is holding, but the internal pressure from the failing reactor is building. It is a temporary solution at best. Fighter wing, you have your target. Commence the incision, Lee relayed, his own voice tight with the strain. The lead fighters opened fire, not with warheads, but with focused, high-energy plasma torches. Brilliant streams of blue-white energy converged on a single point on the Dreadnought's hull. The armored plating glowed, then turned white-hot. Seconds felt like hours. The entire bridge of the Indra watched the live feed, their own heartbeats echoing the frantic pulse of the plasma cutters. The deck plates beneath their feet vibrated with the power being channeled through the ship into the lattice. 30 seconds. The hull gave way. With a final intense flash, the fighters breached the coolant manifold. Now, Solon, Rostova commanded. With a finesse that was beyond human capability, the AI manipulated the containment bubble. It deformed, extending a tendril of force into the newly created opening. It was like a surgeon inserting a catheter into a dying heart. The effect was immediate. A torrent of incandescent plasma, the lifeblood of the dying star inside the reactor, spewed out of the breach. It did not explode into the void. It was caught, channeled, and safely contained within the shimmering energy sphere. She did not wait for a reply. She cut the channel. The countdown stopped at 10 seconds. The balance is held. A single collective exhalation swept through the Indra's bridge. They had done it. They had stared into the abyss of total annihilation and had forced it to blink. They had saved the flagship, its crew, and the very man who had tried to kill them all. It was not a victory of firepower, but a victory of principle. The remaining Xylos ships, now fully disarmed, floated in stunned silence. They had just witnessed their proctor's final, insane act and the humans' impossible, life-saving response. Whatever remained of their doctrine, of their belief in the righteousness of their cause, died in that moment. It was replaced by a profound and humbling awe. Rostova ordered a secure channel opened to Proctor Valerius's bridge. His emergency monitor crackled to life, showing her calm, unyielding face. Valerius stared at her, his expression no longer one of defiant rage, but of utter, soul-crushing defeat. He was a man whose entire universe had been invalidated. "It's over, Proctor," Rostova said, her voice devoid of triumph. It was the voice of a teacher finishing a long, painful lesson. "Your ultimatum failed. Your fleet is disarmed. Your final act of spite was undone. You sought to make a universe that bent to your will. You have learned that the universe does not bend. It only balances." She did not wait for a reply. She cut the channel. In the city of Oakhaven, Ilara stood with her father, watching the sky. The terrifying, beautiful auroras had faded. The blocky, menacing shapes of the enemy ships were still there. But now, tiny, elegant human ships moved among them, guiding them like shepherds leading a lost and broken flock. The fear that had been a constant companion for days was finally gone, replaced by the quiet, steady dawn of a new day. A formal message, drafted by Solon and authorized by Rostova, was broadcast across all galactic public networks. By order of the Terran Concord, under the Inter-System Accord, the Xylos Collective's ultimatum doctrine is hereby declared a belligerent class action. All associated diplomatic and trade privileges are suspended pending a full review. This judgment is recorded on the public ledger, time-stamped and immutable. A precedent had been set. A line had been drawn. Admiral Rostova stood on her bridge, watching as the last of the Xylos fleet was escorted out of the system. The quiet hum of the Indra was a comforting, familiar sound. Her officers were attending to their duties, the tension replaced by a weary but profound satisfaction. They had faced the worst of an ideology and had not become it. They had held the line. The mirror lattice nodes, their task complete, began to cool. Their brilliant active silver faded, their internal light dimming to a passive pewter gray in the endless twilight of space. "We came here to teach a lesson about the cost of ultimatums," Rostova murmured, more to herself than to Solon's silent, glowing form beside her. "We taught them that a demand without a choice is not a show of strength, but a confession of weakness. We did not offer them peace or war. We offered them a mirror to see themselves, and a ledger to record the outcome. That is the only diplomacy that endures. The universe does not bargain, it balances."